Hi, I'm Solène Tircuir, sociologist, global health expert, and immigrant storyteller.
And I'm Sacha Ledon, entrepreneur, startup advisor, and lifelong connector of founders from every corner of the globe.
Welcome to Beyond Borders, a podcast about what it really means to build a life, a career, or a dream far from home.
Each week, we speak with people who've crossed countries and cultures, sharing the challenges, the breakthroughs, and the unexpected moments in between. That's where the real story begins. Welcome to Beyond Borders.
Hi, I'm Dr. Solène Tircuir, and today I'm here with George. He's a venture fellow at the College of Engineering at the University of California, Berkeley, and he's responsible for launching innovation and entrepreneurship programs internationally. George is originally from Greece, and he has built such an impressive career connecting startup worlds of Europe and the US. So with his experience in innovation, venture capital, and innovation strategy, he has helped so many startups grow and build international partnerships. George, welcome to Beyond Borders.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, George. And this is probably a usual question for you, but how do you pronounce your last name?
It's in Greek, it's pronounced Panagiotakopoulos. In the US, people usually go with Panagiotakopoulos, but you can call me George.
So George, let's start with your personal journey. What originally brought you from Greece to the US?
The story, let me see. It's a long story, but at a high level, it was 2008. I had graduated from college from London South Bank University in the UK in 2005, and I went back to Greece and I started working in finance. And this was before 2005. Between 2005 and the end of 2008, which was if you know your recent history. Those were some of the most difficult times for Greece economically. And so it was 2008, it was around the summer of 2008, and I realized that there wasn't much left in Greece for me. The economy was tanking. I was working in finance for the last 3 years. And I was doing well before the economy started teetering. And I thought to myself, I'm going to be smart. I'm going to take the money that I make and I'm going to invest it in the blue chip stocks in Greece. And I invested in the National Bank of Greece, the public telecom company called OTE, and the public utility company called VEI. And I thought, I'm going to be very intelligent with my money. No gambling, nothing. I'm going to be very, very responsible. And I mean, I a few other shares, but some of my shares went from, I think it was roughly 30 something euros that I bought them at, down to 2, 3, 4 euros. So, things were headed south fast. So there wasn't much left for me there. And I decided to move to the US. I had said to myself, actually, I'm going to move to either the UK, specifically London, New York, or California, because those are just three of the, most incredible cities in the world. And I had already spent time in the UK, in London, going to college. I had been to California, but only for a few days. I didn't know it well, but I'd never been to New York. Okay, let me go to the closer place that I haven't been to compared to California. And I just booked a flight, and I had told the girl that I was dating at that time, who used to live in Germany, that I'm going to move to New York at some point in the near future, in the next few months. And she happened to find an internship opportunity in New York, so we moved to New York together. So that's really what propelled me. It was I didn't see anything left in Greece for me, and I packed up my my belongings and headed to new shores for new adventures and opportunities.
Wow. So how did this early experience from Greece to the UK and then to the US influence the way you approach innovation and entrepreneurship today?
I was always very enterprising when I was young. I think I had a lot of energy and probably a shorter attention span than most. and I just wanted to do things. So I had launched a million startups. I tried to launch an energy drink startup. I tried to launch a creperie in Greece. I tried to launch a startup that made indigo gauges that you could put over your motorcycle gauges for the speed and the RPM. This is before a lot of them were digitized. That would just kind of change the color, and I thought maybe that could be something cool because I was very much into motorcycles at that time. I joined a bar a friend of mine had launched in London, and co-ran it with him for a few years. I joined a design thinking and a consulting company at one point. I just did a lot of stuff, and I mean, it taught me a lot. Where to begin? How did it shape my perspective of innovation, entrepreneurship? How much time do you have? It taught me a lot. I learned to let go of my baby, of something that I'd been working on for a long time, and I really had invested everything into it, and just realized, all right, this is just not working. You got to let it go. In the beginning, it taught me. In the beginning, I refused to do it because I became very attached. But then you just learn to let go because you can't afford to hang on to it anymore. It taught me the importance of moving fast. Oh, it really taught me the value and importance of finding the right co-founder. Because when you're young, you think, oh, I'm just gonna get a few of my closest friends. I'm gonna get my best friends, and together we're gonna launch a company, and we're going to, make billions. Clearly, that does not work out. So I tried that with some of my really good friends. Then you start learning the importance of, hold on a second, who fills the gaps that I have, as opposed to who do I like hanging out with. Learn to rely on less on what people say and more on what they do, execute, or show for you. I think it taught me a lot about trade-offs, because everything you do comes at the reciprocal cost of something else. And while it's obvious to us now, I didn't realize that, okay, I'm going to launch this startup. I have like 10 ideas. I'm going to focus on this one. All right, but if it doesn't work out, that came at the cost of the other 9. And when you're 16 or 17 or 18, you don't really realize it because you think you have all the time in the world and all the energy in the world until it wears you down. But then you start making decisions like, all right, if I focus on this, whether it's, launch this company, I can't launch that company, to something even more specific and maybe like smaller in scope. Like if I focus on this task, I won't be able to focus on that other task. It really teaches you to evaluate the trade-offs that you have to make, because entrepreneurs have no time ever. So that was a huge lesson. And I think that I learned the importance of inspiring people. And I say that because, when you're an entrepreneur, especially a really young one, and you don't have a lot of experience and you're just launching a new startup, I always say, pre-seed or seed stage startups, typically they don't have much. They don't have anything often. So you have to convince someone else that, don't worry about the fact that I don't have anything tangible. I mean, I don't have a product, and I don't even have a company, and I don't even have a domain, but I have an idea. And you really have to sell them that vision. And so everything in the other person's body is saying, why would you do this? Like, this person is just another person with an idea. Well, like, what are you doing? And you have to kind of override their instinct of, hey, don't move forward with this because you don't know what's going to happen, and really sell them on a vision. I wasn't always good at it, obviously. I'd like to believe that I became pretty good at it, but yeah, that was one of my biggest lessons, I think. The importance of inspiring people and, developing this contagious sense of enthusiasm and ambition so they could join you in your adventure.
I really love what you say, and I just feel it's such a complex and challenging path. And as you said, there is just not one single path. But I wonder if being immersed in the American market, within also this way of thinking here in America, this is something that has participated in this growing, or is something you think that just is different depending on the context, and in different countries maybe fostered differently, since you have experience in both continents.
So let me give you a story that I think exemplifies some of the differences that I started learning. When I first moved from the US to Greece, I didn't know anybody. I didn't have a community or a network. But I met some people, and we started chatting, and they asked me what I did, and I said, oh, I'm working on a startup. And they said, what kind of startup? And we started chatting about it, and I told them it's a data analytics platform focused on forecasting economic trends based on spending patterns. And they were like, oh, that's interesting. And, how are you thinking about it? And, we were going back and forth. And, shortly after they said, my father, he works at Columbia University and he does something similar, but not exactly. And I think he could, actually help you a lot. And I remember being suspicious. Like, you don't just offer help like that. That's not what I'm used to. And I was immediately thinking, like, what does this person want from me? Why are they offering me this resource? Like, I didn't ask for it. And even if I did, it's just not typical for them to offer. So I immediately said, oh, well, yeah, no, I'm good. I don't need that. Like, everything's okay. I'm like, well, okay, let me know if you change your mind. And that was the weirdest thing for me, because I came from a place where, typically resources aren't, voluntarily offered. If they are, it's in exchange for something. The thing that I was used to was, oh, that's interesting. I might know someone. Why don't you send me all your information? Send me your deck, send me, your financial plan, send me whatever it is that you have. I'll go to that person that I know. I'll share those materials with them. If we find that there is something there, I'll come back to you. You and I will figure it out, like how we're going to work together. And then I'll go back and, the three of us then can sit down. That's typically, the way it works where I came from. But to just be offered like resources like that was crazy to me at that time. And that was just the first time that it happened. And this was 2 or 3 weeks after I first got to the US. I remember just in another conversation, I had an idea for a documentary. And I was speaking to someone that I knew but not well, like we'd met a couple times. And contextually, we were chatting, and I said, yeah, I have an idea for a documentary. Like, oh, what's it about? This, that, and whatever it was that I was thinking about. And they said, well, actually, my friend, he has a production company. Very small time stuff, mostly YouTube videos, but I'd be happy to introduce you. Maybe they can give you some pointers. And again, I was like, who are these people? Where am I? What place is this? People just volunteer connections. I came from a place, and I'm generalizing, and everything I'm saying is wrong in some way, but I came from a place where, your connections, they were like, people treated them kind of like a finite resource, like money almost. Like, I'm not just going to give you my connection because I don't know, they think that they're going to lose it or something. But in the US, they're far more quick to offer you the help. And fast forward today, it's not that, oh, okay, now I'm just comfortable accepting help. The US is a place where you can ask for help. Hey, I'm working on this thing. I have this idea for, whatever it is that I have an idea for. I'd love your thoughts, and if you know of any resources or any other people that I could talk to, I'd appreciate, the guidance. And they'll totally do it. That to me was incredible. So, so many more differences to talk about, in the ecosystem. That was just, those were just a couple stories of the beginning of me realizing 16 years ago how different things would be. Working with investors is different. Working with advisors is different, and happy to dive into the details between the US, Europe, and Asia. The ambitions are different. Expectations are different. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. I'm happy to dive into it, but I'll let you guide me there.
Yeah, well, for sure going to dive into it, George. But since you've also dedicated your career to help young entrepreneurs, or maybe not so young, but entrepreneurs coming from abroad, how did you advise and support them, given that most of them probably, but correct me if I'm wrong, would like to scale in the US and enter the US market? So how did you help these different initiatives, given the very different cultural background and therefore also mindsets you just mentioned in a few examples?
That's okay. That's a good question. What I try to do is I try to offer context and explain, look, I know this is what you're used to. Here's how things work here, and here are the differences. So I'll give you an example. So let's say Solène has a startup idea. She's developed this product. I'm just grabbing my AirPods here. And you're in the US and you're fundraising, and George introduces you to an investor in the US. And this investor is a serial entrepreneur, 18 exits, multimillionaire. He or she is going to come and is going to say, Solène, thank you so much for taking the time. Please have a seat. Tell me about your startup. How did you decide to go in this direction, or choose this color, or whatever it is, or add this feature? And you're going to have it's going to be a conversation between equals looking to exchange value. And at the end, Solene's going to say, I'm raising $2 million in exchange for whatever, 20% equity. And the investor's going to say, that makes sense. Here you go. You need it for materials or marketing or talent or whatever it is. And off to the races. That same conversation in Europe, that same investor, that same type of investor is going to come and they're going to say, so why do you want my money? And that power dynamic is going to be completely different. And that conversation is going to be more of trying to convince that investor, no, look, I worked on this thing which kind of has IP and it's really great, and this so-and-so way. And that investor is going to start casting doubt on your tech. Well, sure, but I mean, whatever it is, the speaker could be better, and that material probably won't last as long, and it's kind of a crowded market. And they do that to cast doubt on your idea. So when Solène says, okay, and at the end I'm raising $2 million in exchange for 20% equity, the investor's going to say, I'll give you 1.6 in exchange for 29% equity. They're going to start negotiating you to death. Now, the ridiculous thing is that your number one job as an investor is to de-risk your investment as much as possible. But in this case, they just increased it exponentially, because now Solène does not have the funds to invest in marketing or talent. You don't have equity to give to a CTO, and your cap table is destroyed, so you're not going to get any follow-on investment. But why do they do this? They do this because, and again, I'm generalizing, angels, investors in Europe, have learned to make money by buying something for €1 and selling it for 2. So they understand spread. They understand buy low, sell high. That's not how the venture model works. In the venture model, you have to think of the next investor. Let me de-risk this investment, this startup, as much as possible from my perspective. Not take as much equity as possible, but to have a fair exchange. And so hopefully the next investor is also going to see the value, and then let me help them as much as we can, because Solène has to raise, seed round, series A, B, C, D, whatever. So let me help her on her way. It's a different model. And, as far as venture capitalists are concerned, it's a little bit different, but VCs typically in the US, if you want to get a job as an investor at a venture capital firm in the US, you pretty much have to have founder experience. You have to have it. In Europe, the majority of VCs, investors in VC firms, are former consultants and investment bankers. And it's funny, I was on a subway in Italy, and I was speaking with a partner at one of the largest VC firms in Europe. And he said to me, what's wrong with seed stage startups in Europe? He said, they don't know their customer acquisition cost. They don't have a leadership development program to ensure employee retention. They don't know what their customer journey is, or their customer profile. And so they're unstructured. Because they're unstructured, we can't invest in them. And what I said is, in Silicon Valley, we call that gold. Give me a good founder with good tech, and I will do their unit economics all day. I'll teach them how to do all the other stuff. That's the easy part. But again, it's because the majority of them are former investment bankers and former consultants. And it's because of this that they use the same tools that they use to evaluate Fortune 500 companies on these startups. And that, you can't do that. Seed stage startups, have 90% of what they have is a vision. They have evidence of a problem and evidence that there's a solution that might work. But if not evidence, like a good idea. So that's what you're investing in. So back to how do I help founders? I tell them these things. I explain to them, this context, so they understand that when I'm in the US and I'm speaking to a VC, I'm either speaking to a former founder or, someone who has extensive experience in working with founders, so they could speak the founder language. When they're speaking to VCs in Europe, they're speaking to more structured thinkers, investment bankers, former consultants. So they need to focus on the value and the alignment and have more data that what they're doing is going to succeed, and they need to lean more into that as opposed to the vision. In Asia, it's a slightly different conversation, but more towards the European side. There, they require a lot of data, if not. And because I give them this context, they're now better prepared to have these different conversations, and they understand that, all right, what I was doing in Europe or what I was doing in Asia is not the same approach that I'm going to have here. It's a completely different ballgame. Yeah, I have a lot of examples specifically around these differences, but telling them not just how things work in the US, but saying, hey, here's how things work in Asia. Here's how they work in Europe. Here's how they work in the US. Here's how they work in Latin America. Now they understand how in the global ecosystem operates a little bit and where they belong within it. So giving them that context really helps them position themselves. One last little example. I have a whole workshop on this. So it's like a 2-hour workshop, but in Asia, it's typical that if you're speaking with a VC, even if partner isn't actually interested in investing in your startup, like after the first meeting they're not interested, they won't tell you. Typically, and again, I'm generalizing, it's expected that there will still be a follow-up meeting. You'll still have 2 or 3 meetings to get to that no. And because of this, founders won't have an ask at the end of the first meeting. They're not going to say, okay, so we're raising, or we need this, or can you help us? In the US, I tell them, look, that's not how it works here. I know that that's how it works there. Here, you will likely not get that opportunity to for a second meeting to have that ask. So you need to come with an ask. And that to them is crazy because it's just not the way that they've learned to engage in those conversations. It's also more of a bi-directional conversation here. It's back and forth. Whereas in, and again, I'm generalizing. In Japan, it's more, I'm going to ask questions, you're going to answer, and, that'll be the majority of our first conversation. Whereas in the US, if you just sit across from, the VC who's interested in just respond, they're not going to be too interested. And that's going to be filled with a lot of, negative signals for them. So, again, we can go through a lot of examples, but providing them these differences in that context really helps them understand not only how to navigate the US ecosystem, but when they go back and they're working with engineers in Asia or VCs in Europe or angels or advisors in the US, they understand where everyone else is coming from.
Yeah, this is so critical for them to have this framework and this understanding of all this communication, negotiation, different stakeholders and their perspective on how to raise funds. And do you have any example of a startup that has grown and had to deal with part of the team in Europe or Asia, part of the team in the US, fundraising in both sides, and has been successful given that it requires all these key ingredients to be successful?
Yes, I do. This is actually a very interesting story because it's about a startup that took tools that they learned here and applied them back home. Well, let me explain. So there was a startup that joined, a U.S. One of UC Berkeley's U.S. acceleration programs, and it was right before COVID hit. And so they learned, to be more ambitious and to, kind of move fast and not dwell on, negotiations. And they learned the U.S. way of kind of working with prospective customers. And in this case, it was a B2B company, so their customers were other companies. preferably larger corporations. And then COVID hit. So they went back to where they were from in Europe to kind of weather the COVID storm. But their strategy was to connect with Europe-based large companies that also had, branches and subsidiaries in the US. That way they could establish that relationship and then come back to the US and continue on their journey. And so what they did is when they were back in their country in Europe, they started having meetings with prospective customers, large companies that is. And they said that, these companies started kind of trying to cast doubt on their product, so they could start negotiations. And they were saying, oh yeah, I get your product and I see how you think you could help us, but these days everyone's trying to do something in this field. And they started out with that kind of a perspective. And this founder, it was funny, he told me the story because I asked him for some examples of some differences he saw. And he said to me that he decided at that moment that he was going to experiment with a more kind of US approach, as opposed to the European approach, which would be to, oh, no, let me try and sell you. Let me try and continue selling you on the value of what I'm doing. So what he said was, and I'm paraphrasing, oh, okay, well, it appears we, as have different perspectives. Sorry that you don't think that this could be of help. We really believe that, given our IP and given, our, framing and, the way we're going about it, that it actually can offer you a lot of value, but no worries at all. I completely understand. If you change your mind or if, you think that there's something else that we could do to help you on your journey, given what we're working on, happy to continue the conversation. And he told me that, that corporate now partner said, no, wait, where are you going? We're just talking. We're just talking. Wait, what are you doing? No, come back. No, let's not, we didn't mean to signal that we're not interested. I'm just saying that, there's a lot of tech out there that's kind of similar and we're not sure. And he said, no, I heard you. I understand. No worries at all. I completely understand and respect that. They said, well, hold on a second. Let's sit back down. Let's talk. And by the end of that meeting, they had a verbal agreement to partner. And a couple weeks later, they had signed an agreement to actually run a pilot. And they later became customers of that startup. And he told me he applied this same approach to 3 or 4, because that was the last time I spoke to him, other prospective partners, and the exact same thing happened. They were like, oh, wait, hold on a second. You're not doing the negotiating thing? Wait, okay, then let's talk on a different level. So that's not to say that's always the approach or that is always going to work, but I think there's huge value in having a broad communicative range. Being able to know what VCs or prospective corporate partners or angels or advisors are interested in or what they're driving towards or what they want in Europe versus Latin America versus the US versus Asia versus Africa. I think there's huge value in that. So that's one story of how this founder took some tools that he learned from the US, applied them back home, and then use that to be able to build a strong foundation back home and springboard back to the US, which I thought was incredible.
Yeah, it seems like he reversed the power dynamic by doing that. So you mentioned the things that surprised you in terms of connections within the different networks in the US. What do you think surprises Americans when they see entrepreneurs from abroad pitching their ideas that you've noticed and that for you was quite insightful as well?
What do I think they notice? Let me start this response by way of an example. One of the most frequent requests that I get from founders from Asia, especially Japan, is introductions to researchers at the university. And it was surprising me, and I would ask why, and they would always say, something to the effect of, well, That so-and-so researcher did research on, this material that I decided to use on my, product, and, speaking with them will further validate my reason for actually using that material. And, and my thoughts were always kind of like, you have 2 months runway. Like, this is not going to help you. You should be asking me for introductions to investors, or how to start thinking about, raising a bridge round, or, introductions to prospective corporate partners that may be able to run a paid pilot with you. This is not going to help move the needle forward, but it's because, in Japan, they're so data driven. They want to know every single decision you've made is based on, a lot of research, a lot of data that supports that being the right direction to move in. Even traction is far more data-based. Traction in the US could be subscribers, it could be users, it could be clicks, it could be obviously revenue, it could be LOIs, MOUs, partnerships. As you move east into Europe, traction is primarily revenue. MOUs, LOIs, yes, pilots, sure. They lean more into that. And as you move further east, like towards Asia, towards Japan, then it's super conservative. Traction is mostly revenue. That's the main thing that we're looking at in customers. Show me 5 years of revenue and 3 years of profitability to convince me that you're onto something. So all that's to say that typically I think investors are surprised at the level of detail and the amount of research that is done, the amount of data that's collected in every single aspect of what the startup is, what the founder's working on, which in their mind is just maybe not relevant. It's not necessary at that point. Whereas, all the way on the opposite end of the spectrum in the US, a founder might be like, look, I managed to get a bunch of hits, likes, clicks, something on my website. A signal is, oftentimes just as valuable as, let's say, traction another way in the US. It supplements a broader picture. It's not the only thing that they'll look at. So I think, those types of approaches are interesting and a little different from founders from different countries.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so interesting. And I guess this is something you learn through experience and not so much in class, except in your class. But that requires a lot of exposure to different cultures and different, initiatives. And speaking of differences, looking ahead for you, what trends do you see shaping the global startup landscape, especially when it comes to cross-border collaborations?
It's interesting. I think COVID did a lot to make the world smaller. People learned how much information they can get, how much interaction they can have, and how much, how easy they can communicate using just Zoom. I think that really catalyzed the change in how startups and investors and companies are going to collaborate moving forward. I think that investors, VCs, I think they're diversifying more and more their portfolio into more geographically diverse locations. It used to be if you were an investor in, France, and 100% of your investments were in France. Now some VCs are saying, okay, 90% in France and 10% in the rest of Europe. And now it's 80% in France, 10% Europe, 10%, the US. So I think they're starting to see the value of diversifying their portfolio. And I think that being able to communicate more easily and have access to resources remotely has helped that. I don't think it's ever going to get to the point where, you could be a startup in, France, and you could fundraise in, Tanzania, and then you could launch your company in, the US. I don't think it's ever going to get to that extreme, but, well, who knows, it might, depending on the startup. But, it is becoming easier to jump across borders. So I think that is changing a lot. I think also it used to be that government organizations used to try and help startups and offer them resources primarily locally. so they could develop their local innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem. So if I'm just making this up, right? Like, let's say you're, I don't know, I don't want to single out a specific country, but let's say, I don't know, in Portugal, let's say the, local government trade organization or the organization responsible for developing future economic opportunities would invest in the local innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem and say, we're going to help founders from Portugal, launch their startups in Portugal and succeed in Portugal. And it makes sense because you're using taxpayer money to, give to founders. You want them to be local. You don't want to take taxpayer money and, founders leave and lose that opportunity or, quote unquote, invest in foreign resources or assets because now that's what they became. But when you do that, then you're limiting the founder to the local ecosystem. So if you're like a biotech startup or a medical device startup, let's say, and you need to work with clinics and hospitals, and there are 100 clinics in Portugal and 1,000 hospitals. If you open that up and you offer them access to global opportunities, now they have access to 1,000 clinics and 10,000 hospitals. And what they're starting to realize, these government organizations, is that if we help them at least have access to a greater market, that increases their chances to succeed. And where are they going to hire their engineers from? Where are they going to hire their admins from? Where are they going to manufacture maybe in the future? It's going to be back in Portugal. So it's better to open up the doors to global opportunities as opposed to, close those and keep them local. So that's also started changing a lot. I work with a lot of government organizations, and now they have programs to help local founders, launch or develop locally, but also other programs to help founders that want to broaden their horizons or think that they have a better chance for success in another country. Now they're starting to help them do that as well. So I think that is also changing. Again, so many different things that are changing, but I think those two are at the top of the list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that your answer highlights that there is no one size fits all. But I guess it's also depending on the sector and how easy things can be, depending on them. We didn't talk much about your experience because you used to be the lead of the Europe and global expansion at Berkeley SkyDeck as well, as part of this long and fascinating journey to do, because you've been involved in helping other startups grow in different areas, and now you're in Berkeley. What passionates you about this mission, and what else would you like to accomplish?
You're really putting me on the spot. That's a good question. I'll tell you what motivates me. I think that's the best I could do. So let me tell you the why first, and then I'll tell you the what. When I was, a founder in Greece and UK and the US, but especially in my earlier years, I didn't have access to resources, really. When I was in Greece, we didn't have many resources. And, it was a much smaller ecosystem, and we're talking 90s, even early 2000s, dial-up connectivity. We didn't have the tools that you have now. Forget generative AI, forget all that stuff. We didn't have much. And so, I had to rely on the very few resources that I had and to get advice from the wrong people that I thought were the right people at that time. And I made a lot of mistakes because I just didn't have the know-how and I didn't have anyone to tell me. And the people who did have some know-how, I kind of feel like they could have done a better job in being a little bit more transparent with me. A little bit more honest, a little bit more direct. Like, no, this is actually like what you need. Focus on this, less on that. And that led to a lot of failures, a lot of frustration, a lot of, not that I would have been successful with those specific endeavors. I mean, I was successful in, a couple of my endeavors, but that was much later in life after I gained some experience. But I can't help but really wish that even today, that I knew more, that I had someone kind of looking out for me. And today, I enjoy having those conversations with founders and even having the difficult conversations on their behalf with investors or corporations that might be trying to either, not lead them in the wrong direction, but maybe negotiate them to death and maybe try to take advantage of them a little bit. I like standing up for them. I like saying, hey, this is how you're going to enter that conversation. And this is, what a successful conversation is going to look like at the end of it. Make sure you walk away with these 2 or 3 things. I like that. I like being the kind of maybe big brother, the co-founder that I didn't have 2 other founders. I can't do that now. I can't go back in time for myself. So that's the why. And actually adding to that, I also left Greece because there weren't opportunities back then for me. And, I think that I think it's a shame when founders have to leave their countries because they just can't find the help or the resources that they need. So if I can play a part in developing those local ecosystems, right? I don't know how much of an impact I can make. I can't change things by tomorrow, but if I could play a small role in helping them find resources locally or connect them with resources internationally. So if they don't want to leave, they don't have to. They don't have to do what George did or so many others do, and hopefully, offer them better chances for success. That I would find very fulfilling. And so that's the why. And the what is, I want to help founders. I want to help them avoid all the, I'd like to help them avoid as many of the challenges, unnecessary challenges that I and a lot of other founders had to go through.
Thank you for sharing that. As through that journey, it's amazing to see how you found a sense of purpose by, it's not just about yourself, but this is so energizing to succeed collectively and to support others and to contribute. So I really also appreciate this reflection regarding your own journey. George, we are reaching the end of this episode, but is there anything else we haven't discussed that you would like to add, even though I know it's such a broad topic that we can talk for hours?
So many things to go over. Maybe just a message to anyone out there that is thinking of starting something or building something, whether it is someone in charge of a new branch of a government organization that's trying to start a new initiative to help entrepreneurs, or it's a founder that has an idea, just start building. Done is better than perfect. There are 1,000 things that I never started because I wasn't sure on how to perfect it. That was one of the biggest mistakes I made. So start building and figure it out. There's I think it's famous kind of experiment where they give executives, I think it's like marshmallows, pasta, like spaghetti pasta uncooked, tape, and like string, and they say build a tower as tall as you can, and you have to be able to balance a marshmallow on top of it. And they do that with a lot of different age groups, and the most successful ones are the kindergartners. And the reason is because the executives, they start building and they try to perfect it while they're building it, and they don't go higher until it's stable, and by the end of it, they just haven't figured much out. Whereas kindergartners just keep doing it, and it keeps falling down, they keep doing it, it falls down, they learn from it, and they learn to iterate, because their process is, let's break things. Let's do this, see if it works. Oh, it broke. All right, let's do it again and do it again and do it again. So just start building. Build something today. Build something tomorrow. Building. When you think you have something, start thinking about, your market. Start thinking about, what you want to launch. Just start is I guess what I'm trying to say.
That's an amazing way to wrap up this episode. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your insights, George. Your work and everything you shared today is such a great example of how cross-cultural collaboration and also your own journey can drive innovation forward.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond Borders and joining us in our celebration of the journeys, successes, and stories of immigrants making their mark in the US. If you found today's conversation inspiring, please be sure to follow, like, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. You can also find more information at beyondborderspod.com. Your support helps us to keep sharing these inspiring and powerful stories with the world. Until next time, keep going, keep growing, and go beyond borders.